Hey everyone, welcome to Remap. My name is Jared, and today I want to talk about Outriders, a fairly recent release by the studio People Can Fly. Now, I played this game on the Xbox Series X with the next gen patch, and as always, these are my opinions and mine alone about the game. Now, one thing I want to note real quick is this game, was on Game Pass right on launch, and as a Game Pass Ultimate subscriber, I was like, finally, I get a big name AAA release, although maybe call it AAA, maybe not. But I just wanted to note that because I didn't pay like the full $60 for the game. It was the first game I've reviewed and talked about where I wasn't like, oh, I have to play this. It was more like, oh, I should give it a shot. I got nothing else to do. So when you're thinking about my review, keep that in mind. I'm not going to give a score to it as an, oh, you should buy it or should not buy it. It's just my review of the game. But as always, we're starting with a spoiler-free review. Although it's not a strong story-based, role-playing game, so there isn't that much to spoil. But I'm just going to jump right in, and I'd like to start with the graphics. And being as this launched with the next gen patch, I was expecting a good looking product. I mean, it's getting to the point now where these larger releases that they aren't by indie studios or big published games, you're expecting good things out of them. And you know what? They delivered well on it. They delivered respectably on it. I mean, it looks like an Unreal Engine game. If you've played a lot of games, you know that Unreal Engine feel when you're looking around an environment and moving through an environment. But the game looks good. I mean, the environments are great. Skyboxes are cool. The creatures and enemies and characters, really cool, unique designs. Although I will say with the characters, the facial animations, they're bad. Like they're not good at all. But you're not playing this game for the facial animations. I mean, that is not the biggest problem. But what really makes me happy, when you're playing this game, is just how the game is running. Because we're finally at a point on console where games just run so well. It's so nice to have a solid 60 with no frame drops. I'm not getting any crashes. During my playthrough, I know some people have had. I wasn't having any problem with bugs. Like, the worst bug I experienced was an audio sync bug in some cutscenes. But, like, the gameplay, it everything felt snappy, felt solid. And it's just so nice to have, at worst case, I'm playing at 60 FPS. It's just such a treat. But going into this, I was expecting a run-of-the-mill, third-person shooter. People Can Fly worked on Gears Judgment quite a few years ago, so I was expecting this would feel a lot like Gears Judgment. A straightforward cover shooter with a little pizzazz with the character abilities. But I was pleasantly surprised by how great all these special abilities and powers synergized with the gameplay. I mean, the abilities that your character has make you feel powerful, and they create a fun balance of juggling abilities and cooldowns to create combos on single targets or groups of enemies. The synergy they created is just really it's really great, and it feels good to play. When you're playing a shooter that has special abilities beyond just the regular gunplay, like when it feels like it works, and in Outriders it works. It works, and the abilities get tangible buffs from different mods on your armor, and I'm going to touch on mods more later. But the loot is a lot more variety than just do X% more damage. There's nothing worse than when you're playing a game that's supposed to be like a big looter shooter or something, and all your improvements are just you do 0.7% more fire damage. No, like it's nice having actual, unique stuff like, you can use this ability more often, or it leaves an AoE, damage dealing buff after you use it. Just actual variety is nice to have. But speaking of these mods, there are just so many of them, and I especially want to highlight the weapon mods because that's the ones you get the most use out of. And the weapons themselves, they're really nothing to write home about. They are, I mean, the most basic. I don't want to insult it, but they are the most generic and basic weapons. You know, you got a few assault rifles, a few machine guns, a couple sniper rifles. You know, they feel nice. They're pretty boring. The mods are where the fun is, and they add so much customization. It's I know I mentioned this before, but it's so nice to have attributes and mods that are just more than, oh, do X% more damage. I mean, there's some that make people explode when they die, some that bring down lightning bolts on them, some that freeze enemies, burn. There's so much great variety, and when you get, you know, better loot and higher level guns, you can have more, you know, multiple mods on each gun, and just create these awesome combinations. And because you'll be playing through and you'll figure out a combo and be like, oh my gosh, this combo could work really well together. And instead of trying to grind through and, you know, find a random drop that has both of the mods that you want, you know, you can customize your weapons and actually create that cool weapon you thought of. But, you know, I was just really impressed by how well the you know, the weapons, mods, and abilities work together. And just created a really, you know, a solid feeling shooter. And this in turn, you know, all improved the loot pool, because this is obviously a huge grind game. I mean, it's a looter shooter. You know, you got some bullet sponge enemies, but having this weapon customization, armor customization, this whole, you know, ecosystem with the mods made the grinding, you know, better, because instead of just going for, oh, I'm trying to get 0.1% more damage, you go, oh shoot, I want to make a gun that's going to suspend people in the air, freeze them, or make them explode when I get a headshot. And you can, you know, find guns at perfect and add them and customize them. Because once you find these new mods, you can just add them to other weapons. It's great. And you're able to level up your the gear you've previously found, so you can create these loadouts that fit your playstyle, which I really appreciate. You know, it's not so much a thing where it's, oh, I find, now obviously a big part of the game is, oh, I found this that does a little bit more stats, the stats are a little bit better, let me instantly equip it. But instead you can actually think about, oh, what abilities do I like, what do I want to combine, and actually create a much more interesting character. But it's not all sunshine and roses for the game, because all the encounters and levels play out, I mean, the exact same way, basically. There's very, very little variety in the gameplay. It's go to location, fight some enemies, go to the next one, fight some more enemies, maybe deal with a mini boss, and rinse and repeat. I mean, it's pretty simple. But I was surprised by how much I was interested in the story. You know, it's not a hugely detailed RPG, but it has some very, very respectable world building. Like, for a completely new IP, it's a pretty well fleshed out world. I was impressed. The tone is really weird at times, though. This is a very strong M-rated game. You know, some games are like, oh, it could be T, could be M. This is an M-rated game. This is oh my gosh, the game's story is whack. But there's like some dark comedy here and there. Tonally, it's a very strange game. It did make me chuckle at a few times, but it's I don't think I've played a game with a tone as weird as this. Just how dark it is, but how, you know, lighthearted and just over the top comedic some elements are. It's a unique game. But I will say, going back to some of my complaints, the game early on when I was playing through it, the game felt a bit confusing, in that the best way to describe it is it's a cover shooter where cover gets you killed. You know, I can tell the developers didn't want people just to sit in cover, you know, and rinse through enemies. But oh my gosh, some of these enemies are just so hyper aggressive. Like, you just get bum rushed by a ton of just high health enemies. And in some areas, you don't even have cover. So I'm like, what am I supposed to do when I'm getting bum rushed by a mini boss that has 50 times the health as me and can hit me in, 2 shots when he's up close? It's very strange with how they develop the AI, because there's some elements of it that make complete sense. You don't want people sitting in cover. You need enemies that can rush you. You need enemies that can throw grenades. But at the same time, it's like, golly, it probably about the last 3/4 of the game, I never sat in cover. Like, cover was useless for me, and I'm like, why'd you build a cover system then? So I thought that could have been tweaked and isolated a little bit better. But the difficulty, that's entirely up to you. You get to set the world tier as you play on, which the world tier, it affects drops and enemy levels. So, if you set it on a really high world tier, enemies are going to be, super high level, super tough. But the loot is also going to be, high level and better. But I kept it on the highest difficulty I had unlocked pretty much the whole game. You unlock higher world tiers as you play through. And, I always kept it on the highest difficulty. It felt like the game scaled better when you do that. You'd obviously get better at the game over time, and it just worked better. But there were some times that I dropped the world tier. I would not recommend stressing yourself out and playing this game for like 2 hours because one boss is so ridiculous. And that can happen when you're on like world tier 13, 14, and 15 near the end of the game. It gets ridiculous sometimes. But another thing I want to touch on, and it's so disappointing to see in especially in looter shooters that are coming out nowadays that have, large, complicated inventories. The UI is just not good. It's just way too clunky and slow. And I don't understand. Like, it's just frustrating to have a UI that you interact with the whole game, and it's just tough to use. But all in all, I mean, Outriders it's a solid game. Fans of looter shooters, they can respect it. I've played tons of games in my time, and I enjoyed it. Was it great? Does it revolutionize anything? No, but it wasn't bad. Like, I mean, I played through the whole campaign, and I got the achievement that I forgot the name of it, but it's complete all the side missions and side quests. So I got a ton of gameplay out of it, and I enjoyed it. I mean, the weapons are pretty standard, but the mods, as I mentioned, they add so much great variety. The powers are fun. They synergize well with combos, and the combat's fun. Like, you're running around, juggling all your abilities, your guns, everything. It's enjoyable. I enjoyed it. The sound design, it's pretty much the bare minimum, but the story was interesting, and as I mentioned, the world building was quite respectable. So if you're a fan of these, grindy bullet sponge games where you're building, your ultimate loadout, I think you'd enjoy Outriders. I mean, as I mentioned, it doesn't revolutionize anything. I don't think I'm going to replay it anytime soon. I mean, it's not a game that I'm itching to replay, I don't think, ever. But I'm not upset that I played it. I mean, it's a solid game. I can tell a lot of work put into it, and I thought it paid off. I mean, I'm going to give the game a B because, I mean, it's a solid game. It's a good game. It's nothing great, but I should say it's nothing great. It's a good solid game. I do think, however, there's an IGN reviewer I saw very recently put it best by the name of John Ryan. In that he said it feels more like a guilty pleasure sci-fi channel show rather than a blockbuster science fiction movie. Because it does have that little bit of jank to it. But, it's a good game. I enjoyed it. B. Not B. Not that mad that I played it. But, now I want to talk about some specifics. My character build, some of the mods I really enjoyed, and just a little bit of the story elements of it. So if you'd like to discover these things for yourself, this is your time to leave. My name is Jared. You have been listening to Remap. Thank you for listening. But if you're still here, I'd like to jump into some stuff. First off, I want to talk about my character. I ended up going with the Pyromancer because it looked really cool. I mean, characters that have fire abilities have always been really interesting to me. Fireball, I think, is the most incredible D&D spell, which is all you really need to know about how I enjoy fire characters. But the one thing about Pyromancer I learned very quickly is, oh my goodness, that character is so squishy. You will get rinsed in no time at all if you're not careful with it. But I ended up using the same 3 skills for literally my entire playthrough. I know some people, everyone has their favorite skills for Pyromancer, but I settled on, first off, Thermal Bomb. You can interrupt, big targets. And when you have groups of smaller enemies or even smaller, weaker enemies by stronger enemies, the Thermal Bomb is just so broken in that you can just deal an astronomical amount of damage in a pretty sizable AoE. Like, it's just great. I had Overheat, which lets you interrupt enemies. Interrupting enemies in this game when you're playing through it, you'll learn how important managing combat is through these interrupts. And you deal a bunch of damage when consuming the burn, which in turn works with my final skill, the Volcano Rounds, which I thought were the best one just because it's ridiculous damage to your primary weapon. I mean, and you have an armor mod that gives you an extra magazine. And to maximize this, I always ran light machine guns. Every encounter, I didn't get to use that. Like, I probably used shotguns for like 5 minutes of my playthrough. And, assault rifles for 5 minutes of my playthrough. Because all I would do is walk into an area, pop my volcano rounds, and just use my big 75, 100, 150 drum mag and just burn through it and reload it and do a second one. It just, as some say, it just works. But when it comes to mods, as I mentioned, the volcano rounds, any armor mods that give you more skill uses are just so useful. They're a must-have for your character. Now, with weapons, you can get some nasty, nasty combos if you line up everything right. Brain Eater, critical shots don't consume ammo. You can use this with volcano rounds and stuff that deal extra crit damage, like Anomaly Surge, to just rinse through enemies because you're not consuming ammo. If you line up your shots right, if you're able to get them running towards you in a straight line, like it's insane damage. But my favorite mods for most of the game were probably Storm Whip, which is the lightning damage. It's just so consistently good in terms of just dealing damage. The freezing bullets, they're so useful for enemies that rush you because, as I mentioned, golly, these enemies rush you like crazy. And then Weightlessness, which is a really late game mod. It has the time rift effect. It raises enemies in the air and really, really helps you manage combat so much better. Now, I know I've mentioned managing combat quite a few times, and if you've played this game, you know what I mean. But if you haven't, when you get into a big combat zone, it's a game within a game in that you're trying to juggle so many things going on at once. Because, first I want to isolate heavy enemies, like the captains, the ones with the little red skull by their names, because those are the heavy hitters, the most health. I need to isolate them and focus on them. So I need to take out, all the weaker enemies around them so I can just focus on them. But you don't just, indiscriminately shoot at the weaker enemies. You prioritize, based on how threatening they are. Like when I'm playing through, I'll go, okay, snipers. Are there any snipers? No, perfect. Spotters, enemies that can, launch rockets at you. And it's just, it's really well designed, I thought, to be able to play through this game and be thinking about it in this way. I mean, it's the whole the combat encounters. I think were very well balanced. with how just the game within the game works. Because you're thinking about all this while continuously, shooting. Because the way to get health back is by dealing damage. I mean, you hit someone with your skill, you do more damage to them, you get more health back. I mean, that's just all it is. And using this with all the skills is great because I'm trying to kite enemies around to use thermal bomb. I'm using my volcano rounds and spraying around so then I can use my skills to deal extra damage to them. With overheat and everything, it's just combat was very well designed. I was very impressed by that. But now when you do get down to the big enemies, you get rid of all the smaller enemies. It's only the big ones. The enemy AI is nothing special. All you got to do is keep moving. You can just kite them around a large structure and slowly whittle them down. Some enemies, it's literally going to take like 3-5 minutes of just kiting them around a structure and just shooting at them, which is not the most exciting thing. That's why I would always run 2 interrupt skills, because I can prevent them from using their abilities. But I will say, People Can Fly, they were smart in that in most areas where you're fighting a larger, more dangerous enemy, weaker enemies will continue to spawn over time. So you have to start that process of, okay, working through your progression, figuring out what you want to prioritize again, which makes it more challenging. But, as I mentioned, the combat just feels solid. Like, you can tell when you're playing a game, if the combat works. And I thought the combat works, so the mechanics work together, and I was impressed by it. Now, the story, bit of a mess, but the less you know about it going in, the better. Just play through. I knew nothing about this game, and I didn't know what to expect. Like, I hadn't even watched any trailers or ads for it. But, oh my goodness, this game goes from 0 to 100 faster than I've ever seen in a game. Like, it's, oh wow, what a pretty planet, to the Geneva Convention doesn't apply because we ain't on Earth. This is such a just you don't see brutal sci-fi games like this often. And so I want to give them credit just by making such an over-the-top, crazy game in terms of the story and setting. But probably the most over-the-top quest and the most entertaining one was early in the game, rescuing Lieutenant McCain. I'll let you look it up. Give it a Google on YouTube. It's just an absolute hilarious ending, and just it showcases how over the top the game is quite well. And lastly, I'd like to touch on just the enemy variety. It's a really solid variety. Real quick, the ones that I had the most challenge with while playing through, and as I mentioned, I was always keeping it on the highest world tier that I had unlocked at the time, and so by the end, I was doing everything on world tier 14. I never got world tier 15 unlocked. I got close, but I was playing on the high double digit world tiers. For humans, the bounty targets were the most challenging ones, especially because they rushed you. I mentioned it before, and I'll say it again. What makes them hard is they bum rush you. You can't sit in cover. You can't do anything because you got to keep moving because they will rush you. In terms of the creatures that were challenging, Screechers, they're challenging at first. They get better over time. Brood Mothers, always a challenge. The Blood Morpher, I am happy you don't see these things very often in the game because they are challenging because they're so quick. Like, the slower enemies are, the easier they are to deal with. Those things are quick and tough. Did not like dealing with them. For the Ferals, the Shaman Warlord is basically a boss. Insane health pool. I don't like this. The Shaman Warlord is harder than basically any enemy in the game except for the final boss, in my opinion. Like, on a high world tier, because they have so much health and deal so much damage. It is just an absolutely ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. There's only 2 times I dropped my world tier. One of them was the Shaman encounter at the end of the Pack City. I was on tier 14, And the thing had multiple warlords spawn with it, and I, gave it a few attempts, and I was like, nope, I am not doing this. This is way too much. Dropped it to tier 10, and that was that. And the second time, obviously, the final boss. If you've played through this game, doing the final boss on high world tier 14, 15 is brutal. I was not about to sit through and spend all that time. I gave Yagak, or however you pronounce his name, one attempt on tier 14, said, no thank you, dropped it down to 10. I was not about to sit through that. But that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed my review and discussion of Outriders. If you have Xbox Game Pass, definitely give the game a shot. I mean, if you have Game Pass Ultimate, it's already included in what you paid. Why not give it a chance? My name is Jared. You've been listening to Remap. Have a wonderful day.